The night was passing slowly. Far away, the ocean waves seemed to be repeating their own secrets. There was a strange silence in the air of Antigua, as if a storm was gathering itself. But this story isn't about the ocean. This is the story of a man who sold dreams his entire life, and then drowned those very dreams. His name was Alan Stanford. He had a smiling face, always dressed in a suit and boots. He was the kind of man who inspired trust just by shaking your hand. And powerful people believed him because he would say, "I am not just growing your money, I am making you rich." This trust is the most expensive thing, isn't it? It's more precious than cash, and when it breaks, it feels as if your very breath has stopped. In one hand, he held the glory of cricket. In the other, the fortress of his bank. He had helicopters, private jets, mansions, and a laugh that glittered like gold. The world believed he was a god of success. But on that one night, it was as if the sky suddenly held its breath. The phones in government offices began ringing, one after another. The typewriters at newspaper offices trembled, and a truth landed in the hands of the FBI, a truth that asked the world's beating heart, "Who will you trust now?" Because revelations were about to be made. And as the scheme was exposed, $7 billion had vanished into thin air. It was enough money to make national budgets tremble. People were crying. Some had lost their retirement savings. Some had lost their children's future. Some had lost their dreams. There was chaos, but there were no answers. There was a crowd, but no way forward. And in the center of it all stood that man, Stanford, who considered himself the king of dreams. Now he stood in the chains of the law, and he was saying, "I am not a thief, I am a visionary." But the world quietly whispered back, it wasn't a vision, it was a fraud, and this was only the beginning. The story would next go to a place where truth and lies battle. A place where it isn't money, but humanity that wins or loses. Because sometimes the greatest theft isn't from a bank vault, but of the trust held in people's heart. They say a person is born twice. Once, the birth the world sees, and a second time the self that a person quietly builds within. Alan Stanford's first birth came with hunger. Not just a hunger for food, but a hunger for identity. Raised on the soil of Texas, he was a boy who grew up brushing the dust off himself from other people's fields. People didn't know him by the name on his school ID card. They knew him by the deficiency that shined in his eyes. "I am something too, I will become someone." His home was ordinary, but his dreams were never small. When other children asked for toys, Alan would look in the mirror and smile. It was as if he was telling himself, "One day this world will say my name. Even if it tries, it will never forget it." Slowly he grew up, and the boy inside him turned into a man. But the hunger only intensified. It turned from embers into a fire. Alan started working. Small businesses, real estate deals. He fell many times, and he got back up many times. For him, failure wasn't the destination. It was just a ticket. He viewed every failure the way a lion catches its breath before its next hunt. Then came the turning point, the small island of Antigua, a place where beneath the blue waves, secrets were hidden, not just the ocean floor. There he built his empire, Stanford International Bank. The name itself was enough to make anyone who heard it believe that this was no ordinary man. When his car raced through the streets of Antigua, people would whisper, "Look, the king is passing by." And it was true, he had become a king. He had special guests, private jets, sponsorships for cricket teams, and spectacular parties. In his world, money wasn't just currency, it was power. People would come to him, and Alan would smile. It was a smile that carried the scent of trust, but held the color of deceit. He didn't just give them money, he gave them dreams. Certificates of deposit, CDs, invest, he'd say, and get double the return. People saw the bank glittering. They saw the world shaking his hand. They saw governments honoring him. So why would anyone doubt? This was Alan's magic. He hadn't come to earn money. He had come to cultivate trust. Every morning, he would stand in his lavish office and look out. He saw the blue ocean, the palace-like buildings, the gold watch on his wrist, and a whisper would rise from somewhere in his heart. "I am God. I can do whatever I want." But greater than any real building is the wall of delusion. And Alan sat hiding his truth behind that very wall. He wasn't just becoming rich. He was busy trying to make himself immortal. There was always a glint in his eyes, but it wasn't the glint of happiness. It was the glint of fear. Fear that the world might see him as he truly was. A man trapped in the cage of his own success, who had begun to believe he was a god. Mansions, fame, respect. He had everything, but in the dark of night, when the world was asleep, his heart was. He would place a hand on his chest and think, even if I snatch all this away, who will challenge me, the world, or the people whose hope I have stolen? Alan Stanford was not just a story, he was a warning. He was winning, he was shining, he was flying. But one truth remained: the greater the height, the more brutal the fall. Alan had convinced himself that he wrote his own destiny, but in the book of fate, there is always one page left blank, upon which the downfall is written, and that page was slowly turning toward him. Because a man who believes he is a god does not deceive the world first, he first deceives his own heart. The ocean waves crashed against the shores of Antigua. Blue skies, white sand, and distant yachts looked like a living postcard. But amidst this beauty, an empire was about to be erected that the world would mistake for success. In truth, it was merely an illusion. Right here, under the golden blanket of the Caribbean sun, Alan Stanford began his reign. Stanford International Bank. Just hearing the name, it didn't sound like a bank, but like the throne of an empire. Palace-like offices, glass walls, expensive furniture, and the guards standing at the doors. Everything screamed that this wasn't just a place for money. It was a place for power. The clients who came here weren't just visiting a bank. They were entering an experience. There were gold-plated pens on the reception desk, red carpets on the floor, and the smiles of the staff. The smiles were so warm, it was as if every face was saying, "You are special, you are worthy, you have been chosen." And what does a person really want? Money? Yes. But even before that, they want importance, identity, and respect. This is what Alan sold. Stanford Bank made a promise that startled even experienced investors. An 18% return, stable, risk-free. While the rest of the world talked of recession and uncertainty, Alan Stanford was saying, here your money doesn't just grow, it flourishes. People wondered, when other banks were giving 5% or 6%, how was he giving 18%? But all doubt vanished where the dazzle of belief began. The magnificent building, the queue of wealthy clients, the handshakes with government officials, and the media spotlight silenced both the heart and the mind. Stanford's clients would say, if this man were a fraud, how could he be this successful? And that was the greatest illusion of all. Alan wasn't just rich. He lived his wealth as a spectacle, a performance. He used private jets like taxis. Helicopters landed in his courtyard as casually as birds landing on a tree. Multi-million-dollar yachts cruised the way. He had mansions with marble walls, glass ceilings, infinity pools, and tropical gardens. At every party there were rivers of champagne. At every event there were celebrities, models, business tycoons, and politicians. And in the midst of it all, Alan would smile. It was a smile that said, "Look, I have won. The world is mine." People mistook that smile for success, but in reality that smile was a mask. Then came his most clever move: cricket sponsorship. It was a sport fueled by both passion and emotion. Alan spent millions of dollars on it: tournaments, television ads, team sponsorships. His logo and his name began to glitter on every field and every trophy. People said, a man who invests in cricket cannot be a swindler. And it was right there that Alan truly won the world over. He had trapped them in a web of magic. The cricket boards were with him. The legends were with him. The media was with him. So why would the public doubt? Trust builds silently. Doubts die, choked off. In Antigua, the newspapers printed his name. In the USA, business magazines called him a financial genius. Interviews, award ceremonies. It wasn't Alan being built, but the image of Alan, powerful photographs, elite circles, VIP treatment. The world believed what it was seeing, because people are less impressed by the truth and more impressed by the glitter. People weren't just depositing money in the bank, they were handing over their dreams. Families brought their life savings. Retired people brought their pensions. Businessmen brought their future. Alan spoke to every investor as if they were the most precious person in the world. He spoke slowly, looked them in the eye, and gave them confidence by holding their hand. Your money isn't just going to be safe, It's going to be great. Trust, just like compound interest, kept growing. Those who were close to him, he bought them with watches, trips, promotions and gifts. And for those who were close but still not loyal, there was a silent fear. The kind of smoke from power that eyes cannot see, but the heart can feel. Someone's transfer, someone's job ending, a stain on someone's reputation. It all happened quietly, with a smile. Alan Stanford didn't make friends, he made devotees. And the most interesting part was that Stanford wasn't alone in this. Every investor, every partner, every admirer slowly began to awaken the greed within themselves. Because greed doesn't stay in one place. It spreads, it's contagious. Alan wasn't really stealing money from anyone. He was buying people's dreams, hopes and morality. And that is why when the fall came, it wouldn't be of just one man. It would be the downfall of an entire crowd. And then from somewhere within this web of illusion, a small crack began to emerge. A question, such stable success, for how long? But by that time, the world was so mesmerized that this question would rise into the air and fall right back down. Unheard, ineffective. Alan Stanford wasn't just one person, he was a dream shining in millions of eyes. And just like every dream breaks, this one too was ready to shatter. Beneath the golden sunshine of Antigua, amidst the soft sound of the waves, Stanford International Bank looked like a royal palace from the outside. But inside, there weren't just bricks and stone, there was a net woven not from threads, but from trust and cleverness. Alan Stanford hadn't just built a bank, he had created an ecosystem of illusion, a place where doubt could not grow, where asking questions was a crime, and where behind every smile, a secret was hidden. People thought this bank multiplied money. The truth was, it was just moving money around, paying old investors with new investors' money. A Ponzi palace that stood not on strong walls but on the continuous flow of incoming cash. But the world didn't know this. The world only saw the grandeur. In reality, it was the shadow of debt. Alan knew that if the truth is kept in a closet, doubt will find the key. So he hid the game in papers, numbers and attractive reports. An audit happened every year. But who was the auditor? His own people. Numbers were created on the balance sheets like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Sometimes growth, sometimes stability, sometimes record returns. If there was any reality, it remained buried behind files. Mistakes weren't just erased, they were eliminated. The books didn't tell the truth, they told a story. Alan's story. A man who didn't just understand the system, he created the system. The people working inside the bank weren't just employees, they were cogs in the machine of trust. No questions, no doubts. Because there was a reward on every table. Bonuses, travel, luxury, promotion. And if anyone questioned this loyalty, the breath of their career was slowed down. Many knew something was wrong. But when you are being handed paradise, people stay quiet, thinking, if this is a dream, let me live it before it breaks. This was blind trust. But Alan didn't call it trust. He called it control, and the quieter the control, the deeper it is. Stanford's empire was spread across oceans. Shell companies, offshore accounts, hidden transfers. What the public called global business was actually just vaults hidden behind a fog. Every transaction was a thread that even if someone caught it, the other end would be found somewhere else. In another country, under another law. Stanford's rule was simple. Be in so many places that you can't be caught in any single one. The system was complex. That's why it felt secure. But the truth was, the system wasn't strong. Only the people's trust was strong. Stanford wasn't just a man with money. He was the king of influence. It wasn't just bankers who came to his office. Cricket legends, Hollywood stars, Caribbean leaders, and US senators came. Hands were shaken, pictures were taken, laughter echoed, and the world saw that such important people were with him. So how could this man be wrong? Public psychology is simple. The crowd follows the famous face, and Alan chose this exact weapon. The glittering crowd. This wasn't a bank. It was a stage where Stanford was the actor, and the world was the audience. Every day the bank grew, but every day a shadow grew behind it. The shadow of risk. The bigger the empire, the bigger the collapse that awaits. A Ponzi scheme has one rule. When the pace of new money stops, the dream falls to the ground. And the world, which considered Alan a genius, could not see that the sand beneath his feet had already slipped. The cracks were small, mismatched statements, unusual withdrawals, questioning whisper, but the illusion was so strong that people said Stanford cannot be wrong. And this blind faith was both his greatest strength and his most fatal weakness. Slowly the puzzle was set. Now all it needed was one push, and the empire would begin to shake. The wheel of deceit was turning. Time was chasing it. And in the financial air of Boston, London, and New York, for the first time the scent of something is wrong was beginning to rise. For now everything was calm. But this was the calm of the sea before the storm. The calmer the sea appears, the more restless its undercurrents are. And the same thing was happening in Stanford's empire. From the outside the bank was shining. Advertisements, events, his flag was waving on cricket fields. But deep inside in the foundation, an invisible tremor had begun. The cold wind of 2008 shook the world. Wall Street trembled. Lehman Brothers had fallen. Banks were collapsing. One by one, this was the moment when the world realized for the first time, trust too can go bankrupt. We heard many banks have failed. We want to withdraw our money. Investors, relax. My bank is different. We are the strongest. Inside Stanford's bank, the low murmur of panic began to rise. Employees began to read the questions in each other's eyes. Phone calls got longer, voices got quieter, and the burden of files increased. In one meeting, Stanford slammed his fist on the table. The world can drown, but we will not. But there was less anger in his voice, and more fear. This was not the Stanford who fooled the world with a smile. This was the Stanford who was realizing for the first time, the walls are closing in. How are the returns so stable? Where is the liquidity? Why are the foreign audits closed? Stanford laughed and said, the world is trying to take me down, and I will win. Stanford's PR team was scrambling. Interviews, talks, public statements. We are safe. We have reserves. Do not panic. The crowd shouted. Give us our money. The bank cashier whispered, we are low on cash. Stanford was looking at the city from his glass office. The palm trees, the blue ocean, the sunshine, everything was still there. But his mind was not at peace. He remembered his youth, that boy from Texas, who wanted to conquer the world, who had started to believe he was a god. And today, he was a prisoner in the world he himself had built. Sometimes, empires aren't built externally, they are built inside our ego. And when the crack appears, first the papers tear, and then the dreams. That night, Stanford raised a glass of whiskey. Alone, he looked at his own eyes in the reflection. He said, I cannot fall. I have shown the world that I can do the impossible. But his voice was trembling, and even the whiskey gave him no comfort. Dreams don't just break, first, they shake. And Stanford's dreams were already shaking. Now it was only a matter of time. How long until they shattered? Who would testify? And would there be even one person left in his empire who could tell the truth? The ocean waves were making noise outside. Inside, the silence was screaming. One of the world's richest and most dazzling empires was suddenly about to turn to dust. In the skies of Antigua, the sun rose that morning just as it always did, but hidden behind that light was a darkness. A darkness that millions was about to swallow lives. Outside the bank's glass building, people were arriving in suits, just like any other day. But inside, the atmosphere had changed. Someone said fearfully, the financial investigation agency is here. The game is over now. And in the blink of an eye, the entire empire trembled. Officers in black suits entered. Files were sifted through. Computers were sealed. Safes were locked. The hallways, which until yesterday were filled with fragrant perfume and laughter, now smelled of panic. Employees looked at each other. It was true. They were part of a fraud. Many people were too shocked to even sit down. For the first time in their lives, they realized that sometimes becoming a criminal isn't a choice. Blind faith makes you one. The TV screens were screaming. $1 billion Stanford bank scam exposed. Investors panic worldwide, from London to Antigua, New York to Mumbai. Every newsroom had only one name: Alan Stanford. Cameras were flashing intensely outside the bank. The very people who took smiling photos next to him yesterday were now broadcasting his ruin live. This is the truth of the world. Fame doesn't always bring applause. Sometimes it brings stones too. Bank operations are suspended. Our life savings are inside. That was my 40 years of hard work. My retirement fund is gone. Sir, we are just employees. What is our fault? Luxury cars were parked outside. Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Ferrari. But their owners didn't have the courage to even walk back to them. For the first time, people understood that wealth and security are two different things. An elderly woman whispered, "Son, my pension, my medicine, what will happen now?" A young trader put his hands on his head. "I am finished." It is true, some lost money, but some lost their lives. There was a swarm of cameras, shouting journalists, and flashing lights. In the middle of it all was Stanford. Yesterday's emperor was in handcuffs today. His face was calm, almost smiling, as if he were saying, "I cannot lose. The world is wrong, not me." But the truth was what the handcuffs revealed. An empire of deceit is dazzling, but it does not last. The sound of a helicopter roared. The car drove away and Stanford's empire became history. Cases were opened, records were pulled, and the audits were brought forward. All the numbers were lies. Those returns, those guarantees, those fancy statements, they were all illusions. People collapsed to the ground, crying, "We thought he was a god." One man broke down completely, saying, "I had brought my daughter's fee money. It's all gone. What will I tell them at home? We earned it with hard work, but we lost it because of trust." Trust is perhaps the world's most expensive currency. Some people shouted in anger, "He deserves life in prison." Others sat silently, their checks, papers, and policies crumpled in their hands. Every shocked face was saying the same thing. It isn't greed that destroys you, it's trust. Greed destroys a few people, but trust destroys everyone. When empires fall, the sound isn't loud. Hopes shatter slowly, like glass. Sometimes the greatest crime isn't stealing money, it's stealing hope. Someone's wedding fund, someone's medication for their old age, someone's retirement dream, someone's daughter's school fees. This wasn't just wasted, it was betrayed. The distant ocean continued to flow peacefully, as if the world was not going to stop. But for those people, life had stopped right there. Stanford's eyes held ego, the people's eyes held tears. Some lost money, some lost their lives. There was silence. The hopes, anger, and broken dreams of millions of people were all trapped within the four walls of a courtroom. And standing in the middle was that man, Alan Stanford. There was a time when presidents would stand to shake his hand. Today that same man stood before a judge. His hands weren't even trembling. There was no shame in his eyes, just an ego, hard as stone. The judge opened the case. The lawyers picked up their files. There were mountains of evidence, and a long line of witnesses. A name that was once a symbol of power had now become the name of a conspiracy. "Mr. Stanford, is it not true that you promised people false returns?" "I am not a fraud. I am a visionary." Silence in the court. "I built an empire. I gave people dreams. If the system broke, it doesn't mean I was wrong." There was a coldness in his voice. He was trapped in his own illusion. There was money in the vision, not truth. An elderly investor was called to stand. He had tears in his eyes, and his hands were trembling. "Sir, I put the money for my wife's treatment into his scheme. She is no longer here, and he says he is a visionary." There was silence in the courtroom. Someone wiped their eyes with a handkerchief. Stanford did not look away for even a second. "Our children's future is gone. He sold us dreams. We trusted him. We thought we were doing something good. We were all deceived." A faint smile appeared on Stanford's face, as if all of this was just weakness in his eye. Where were all those people outside the court who used to take photos with him? The ones who saved him a seat at the cricket stadium, the ones who filled his glass at parties, the ones who acted like masters using his money. Everyone was gone. Phones were turned off, and names were erased. The carpets of power are dazzling, but they are filthy underneath. And when the tide turns, people don't offer loyalty. They create distance. Months went by. Hearings, statements, tears, documents, and then, the moment arrived. "Alan Stanford, you are sentenced to 110 years. No more business meetings, no more champagne, no more red carpets, just bars, cold walls and an ego that had turned to ash. No one in the courtroom clapped. This was not a victory, it was a bitter truth. When a leader falls, it is the followers who are broken. Stanford stood calmly. Did anyone think he would cry? No. He had the same arrogance on his face, as if he had lost nothing at all. No apology, no regret, no remorse. He rose from his chair as if to say, "The world just didn't understand me." Sometimes the crime is committed in silence, and so is the sentence. The media was waiting outside. "Do you have any regrets? I am a visionary. The criminals are the people who are stopping me." And he walked away, as if the world was still small and he was still big. True visionaries aren't the ones who build buildings. They are the ones who build trust. And Stanford had lost that trust. The dust had now settled. The seals on the files had grown cold, and the final strike of the judge's gavel, which had echoed in the courtroom, was now lost somewhere in the noise of time. The world outside started moving again, but someone's dreams and someone's trust remain imprisoned in that room, where the truth arrived far too late. But the story was still alive. It lived on in people's memories, in their ruined lives, and in those questions that will never be answered. Alan Stanford went to jail, but that $7 billion slipped through the fingers like sand from the ocean. Governments kept trying and lawyers kept fighting, but decades of hard work, people's aspirations, the pensions of the elderly, the savings of mothers, and the futures of children were all lost somewhere. Somewhere in a dark bank account, somewhere in an offshore file, somewhere in the champagne of a beautiful night. That island of Antigua, where Stanford's empire once stood, is quiet now. The airport lounge, which once echoed with the roar of Stanford's private jet, is silent today. The wind at the harbor still blows, but the old men sitting there know that their lives were stolen to fund someone else's dream. The small shopkeepers in the Caribbean, who once thought Stanford was like a god to them, still say today dreams are for sale, and we just buy. In the USA, victim groups are still circulating files in the courts. Some of the elderly victims passed away while still waiting. Some people still write letters to the government, to the court, and to themselves. Someone said, "I didn't lose money, I lost trust." And trust is the most expensive thing of all. When people clap in cricket stadiums, somewhere an analyst remembers the Stanford Super Series, that golden box, that night when the players' dreams were weighed in glitter. The game moved on, but a stain remained. That dark chapter of money and glamour in sports still whispers that not all that glitters is gold. The financial system changed, but not completely. Offshore loopholes still exist. It's not that new Stanfords haven't been born. Perhaps they have, just with different names. The fraud doesn't change, only the method does, and the dream is always sold in the same way. Dazzling, sweet, and dangerous. A fraud only works when people are willing to buy the dream. An empty office. The glass isn't broken, but the trust is. There is dust on the file. On the wall, Stanford's faded nameplate is slowly gathering rust. Outside, the Antiguan Sea is churning. The waves crash against the shore, silent and merciless, just like the truth. It is as if they are saying, no matter how far you run, there is always a reckoning. Sometimes the biggest robbery doesn't happen in a vault, but in the heart and the mind. The story has ended, but the lesson is still floating in the air. Today you saw how dreams are sold, how trust is broken, and how glittering palaces are sometimes built upon the deepest darkness. Remember, there are two kinds of people in the world. First, those who build their destination through hard work, and second, those who build empires on the dreams of others. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, it's a sweet word, a promise, and a signature. If this story made you think, touched your heart, or left you with questions, then please join us on this journey. This was just one truth. Next time, we will take you into another mystery, another deceit, into another world, where money, power, and greed run faster than the law.